Hello, welcome to the Midnight Storytellers Legacy Project. I'm Chloe, and if you make yourselves comfortable, I have a story to tell you. There was once a king in Wales. His name was Vortigern, and King Vortigern had a number of nasty habits, one of which was a beard. Now, I know that a lot of beards are beautifully trimmed, but King Vortigern had the kind of beard that birds could happily have nested in. If you looked at his beard closely, well, I wouldn't advise it. Normally there were the remains of last week's breakfast in it. What am I saying? Last month's dinners. King Vortigern was also a coward. King Vortigern was terrified of the Vikings that were raiding Wales at the time of this story. So, Vortigern decided to have a big, strong castle built, and he would go and hide in the castle and be safe. That was his plan. He got the builders in. He said to the builders, I want you to build me a big, strong castle, and if you do it well, I will pay you in gold and jewels. If you don't do it properly, I'll have your heads chopped off. The builders smiled. The builders were confident. The builders got a lot of stone in and hired extra men and set to work on top of the hill that King Vortigern had chosen as the site of his castle. On the very first day, the builders made excellent progress, and now this is a bit technical. They didn't dig a lot of foundations that people didn't in those times, but they got quite a lot of the curtain wall set up, and they went home for their tea that night feeling pretty pleased with themselves. But when they came back on site the next morning, everything they'd done before, every stone they'd set, was tumbled and fallen. The builders were horrified, and you can imagine that King Vortigern was not best pleased when he came on site. Right, he said, you're useless. Guards, take these useless builders away and have their heads chopped off. And the builders flung themselves on their knees in front of the king, and they said, Your Majesty, please, please, we don't understand. Give us a second chance, please. Vortigern gave them a second chance, and that second day the builders worked harder and faster than they'd done for a very long time, and at the end of the second day they'd got several courses of stone, beautifully dressed and at the right angles and everything in the right place, and the builders went home for their tea that night, feeling pleased with themselves. But when they came back on site this morning, every stone they'd put in place the day before was scattered across the hilltop. King Vortigern arrived. Guards, seize these useless builders and have their heads chopped off. The builders flung themselves flat on the ground in front of the king. Your Majesty, we don't understand. Please, please spare our lives. We don't understand what is happening here. There must be magic. There must be magic at work here. And for once in his life, the king listened. He sent for his advisors, his wise men. That meant more beards and long robes. And the king said to his advisors, find out why my castle walls are falling down. And the wise advisors, knowing their king, went off and pretended to work magic. They lit fires and they looked into the coils of smoke. They went down to the river and looked into the swirls of the flowing current, and they made patterns in the sand, all as some kind of strange, mystical divination process, which was completely fake. The advisors came back to the king and they said, Your Majesty, we know why your castle walls are falling down every night. The stones need blood. They always talk like that to sound magical and impressive. The stones need blood. You must find a boy who has no father, and you must give his blood to the stones. Find a boy who has no father, and give his blood to the stones. So the king called for the captain of his army and told him the mission. The captain of the army was taken aback. The captain of the army was a brave young man. He would happily defend his king. He would fight Vikings for breakfast, lunch, and tea. But he was not about hurting any little boys. But those were the king's orders, and he had to obey. So the captain and the army rode out across the valleys and over the mountains and through the villages of Wales. And it was on a morning of lashing rain and cold wind that the captain himself rode into a scruffy, muddy little village. And literally, as he came in past the first huts, a gang of children ran across the road in front of him. They were chasing a small lad out in front. The boy was really small and skinny and scruffy, dark hair. And as he ran past the captain, right in front of the horse, the boy looked up at the captain and grinned. The other children were shouting after that small boy. Emrys, Emrys, Emrys has no father, na 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 na, Emrys has no father. And the captain's heart sank. This was the boy he'd been sent to find. This was a boy who had no father. This was the boy he had to take back to the king and the stones. And very reluctantly the captain turned his horse to ride after Emrys, who actually stopped and turned right in front of the captain's horse and grinned up at him and said, "Well, why are you hesitating? We mustn't keep the king waiting." The captain did the biggest double take, and as if in a dream reached down and picked up the boy by his soggy, rain-soaked shoulders and plonked little Emrys on the saddle in front of him, turned the horse around and rode back to the hilltop where the wise advisors and the builders and King Vortigern were waiting. As soon as they got there, the boy jumped down from the horse and ran straight to King Vortigern. No one had told Emrys which one the king was. Emrys ran straight to him, bowed politely, and with that cheeky grin he said, "Your Majesty, there is no need to sacrifice anybody. All that stuff about blood to the stones, it's a load of rubbish. I don't know what those men are thinking about. Look, I can tell you, Your Majesty, I can tell you why your castle walls are falling down. It's like this, see. About 1,000 years ago, somebody locked 2 dragons in a box, and they hid that box in a lake under this hill. If you get your builders to dig down right inside the hill, they'll find the cave and the lake, and then they'll find the box, see? It's big. I mean, it's as big as a... Well, I was going to say it was big as a rugby pitch, but you haven't invented rugby yet. Never mind, it's a big box. You take the lid off and you let those dragons out. They've been in there far too long." Now, you might be wondering, why would King Vortigern even begin to believe that story? I'm not entirely sure, but one thing was, it was such a crazy, fantastical story, he really couldn't do anything except believe it. So, King Vortigern ordered his builders to start digging into the side of that hill. And it wasn't very long before they broke through, and there was a crashing and crumbling of stone and splash down into the pitch-black waters of the lake hidden inside the hill. The builders opened up the side of the hill some more, and waters drained away. And in the gloom, everyone peering in could see the corners of a gigantic grey lead box. Somehow, the builders got it to the entrance. They dragged it to the entrance. And then everybody, including the wise men and most of the army and the builders, they got around the lid, the edge of that box, and they pushed and they heaved, and that grey leaden box lid started to slide with a slow scraping sound. A jet of flame shot out of one end, a black claw curved over the side, and then the lid was sliding all by itself, and an immense red dragon heaved itself up onto the edge of the box, and for the first time in 1,000 years, with the sound of 1,000 leather coats spreading out, the red dragon unfurled its wings and shook them out. At the end of the box, another dragon was emerging, gleaming, shining white, whiter than snow, very crumpled, very creaky, slowly, painfully stretching itself out along the edge of the great grey box. And then both dragons looked around and saw each other, and they were off, soaring up into the air, hissing and breathing fire and swiping at each other with claws and tail. The fight took them tumbling over and around and circling the hilltop at full speed. And the roaring and the hissing spread out across the countryside, terrifying people for miles around. And still the fight rattled and roared around the hilltop. And then the red dragon, flying a bit faster, a bit stronger, flew high up, looped over and dived down and bit the white dragon hard in the shoulder. The white dragon screeched and pulled away, got free of the red one, turned tail and zoomed at full speed away across the fields and the hills and over the borderlands. The white dragon flew away into England, where it was a very long time before it was seen again. The red dragon was triumphant. The red dragon reared up in the air, roaring in happiness. And of course, you all know, the red dragon has become the symbol of Wales. It is that red dragon we see on the Welsh flag today. And that little boy, Emrys, when he grew up, his name changed. When Emrys grew up, he became the most magical, the most famous wizard that Britain has ever known. He became the friend of King Arthur, and we remember him as the wizard Merlin. Thank you.